Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Once upon a time when cartoon characters, warriors, and even giant dragons coexisted. In the middle of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the clouds, a queen sat at her palace window, which had an ebony black frame, stitching her husband's shirts. While she was thus engaged and looking out at the snow, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. Now the red looked so well upon the white that she thought to herself,
"Oh, that I had a child as white as this snow, as red as this blood, and as black as the wood of this frame."
Soon afterwards a little daughter came to her, who was as white as snow, and with cheeks as red as blood, and with hair as black as ebony, and from this she was named Snow White. Her family was very happy. Not long after, her mother passed away. Snow White was too young to understand what she was about to overcome. About a year afterwards, the king married another wife, who was very beautiful, but so proud and haughty that she could not bear anyone to be better looking than herself. She owned a wonderful mirror, and when she stepped before it and said,
"Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?"
it replied,
"The queen is the fairest of the day."
Then she was pleased, for she knew that the mirror spoke truly. Little Snow White, however, grew up and became prettier and prettier. And when she was 7 years old, she was as fair as the noonday, and more beautiful than the queen herself. When the queen now asked her mirror,
"Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?"
it replied,
"The queen was fairest yesterday. Snow White is the fairest now, they say."
This answer so angered the queen that she became quite yellow with envy. From that hour, whenever she saw Snow White, her heart was hardened against her, and she hated the little girl. Her envy and jealousy increased so that she had no rest day or night. And she called a huntsman. "Take the child away into the forest. I will never look upon her again. You must kill her, and bring me her heart and tongue for a token." The huntsman listened and took the maiden away. But when he drew out his knife to kill her, she began to cry, saying,
"Ah, dear huntsman, give me my life. I will run into the wild forest and never come home again."
This speech softened the hunter's heart, and her beauty so touched him that he had pity on her. He said,
"Well, we must run away, poor child."
From that day on, the hunter accompanied Snow White and trained her. Snow White practices archery, boxing, and swordsmanship. She practiced very hard, and after only a short time, Snow White had completely changed. She became a powerful warrior. She has confronted and killed many huge monsters. Since then, she has traveled all over the world to help poor people. One day she saw a little house near. She entered in to rest. In this cottage everything was very small, but very neat and elegant. However, the floor is very dusty. Even though she didn't know whose cottage it was, Snow White still cleaned the house thoroughly. Soon the cottage became clean and beautiful. After that, because she was so tired, she laid herself down on one bed and went to sleep. The bed was too short for her. When it became quite dark, the owners of the cottage came home, 7 dwarfs, who dug for gold and silver in the mountains. They first lighted 7 little lamps and saw at once that somebody had been in, for everything was not in the order in which they had left it.
Someone has been lying in our beds.
A dwarf shouted.
Oh, heavens! Oh, heavens! What a beauty she is!
Snow White awoke and was quite frightened when she saw the 7 little men. But they were very friendly and asked her what she was called.
My name is Snow White,
Was her reply.
Why have you come into our cottage?
They asked. Then she told them how her stepmother would have had her killed, but the huntsman had spared her life. When her tale was finished, the dwarf said,
Will you look after our household, be our cook? If so, we will keep you here.
And Snow White answered.
Yes, with all my heart and will.
And so she remained with them and kept their house in order. In the morning the dwarfs went into the mountains and searched for silver and gold, and in the evening they came home and found their meals ready for them. The queen, meanwhile, supposing that her stepdaughter was killed, believed that she was now above all the most beautiful woman in the world. One day she stepped before her mirror and said,
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?
And it replied,
The queen was fairest yesterday. Snow White is fairest now, they say. The dwarfs protect her from thy sway, amid the forest, far away.
This reply surprised her, but she knew that the mirror spoke the truth. She knew that Snow White was still alive, so she dyed her face and clothed herself as a peddler woman. None could recognize her. In this disguise she brought a poisoned apple and went over the 7 hills to the house of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door of the hut and called out,
Goods for sale, beautiful goods for sale.
What do you have?
Snow White asked.
There is 1 apple I will give you for free.
The queen answered. Snow White very much wished for the beautiful apple and happily took it. But remember, Snow White is now a mighty warrior. She held the apple and smelled the poison immediately. She realized this was her stepmother in disguise.
Don't try to fool me,
Snow White shouted. She drew her sword to fight with the queen. With fighting experience and skills taught by the hunter, Snow White finally used his sword to pierce the queen's heart. The queen screamed in pain and turned into a cloud of smoke and fled. The angry queen fled back to the palace. She immediately thought of another way to destroy Snow White. She ordered a soldier,
Bring this chest and place it in front of the 7 dwarfs' house.
The soldier held the chest and secretly passed through many places. Finally, he placed it in front of Snow White's door and left. The next morning, Snow White opened the door. She discovered the chest and lifted it up.
Who left the chest here?
Snow White wondered curiously. She carefully opened the chest. Suddenly a poisonous snake jumped out and tried to bite her. But Snow White easily caught the snake. She caressed it and let it go. Meanwhile, the queen once again asked the magic mirror, and it replied,
The queen was fairest yesterday. Snow White is fairest now, they say.
The queen was angry and understood that the snake could not kill Snow White. She decided to use the final weapon, the nuclear button.
This time Snow White must die.
She smiled evilly and pressed the button. A missile launched from her castle. The missile quickly flew to the house of the 7 dwarfs. Boom! 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 The house immediately caught fire and exploded. Luckily, Snow White was going into the forest at that time, and the dwarfs were working, so they weren't at home. That night, when the 7 dwarfs and Snow White came home from work, they were very angry when they saw the burned house.
We need to kill the queen once and for all.
Snow White decided and told the 7 dwarfs. Following the missile's trail, Snow White found the queen's castle. It is a gloomy castle, covered with black mist all the year. 7 armed dwarfs followed Snow White closely to support her. When Snow White entered the castle, the queen was already waiting there.
At last you have come,
said the queen. They looked at each other face to face.
Today you must die, and I will be the most beautiful woman in the world,
the queen said. A pair of wings grew from the queen's back, 2 horns grew on her head, and her teeth grew longer. Finally, the queen turned into a giant fire dragon. Its wings were fiery, as big as the castle. It roared and attacked Snow White. Snow White was not afraid at all, because she had fought many monsters. She used her shield to block the fire spewing from the dragon's mouth, and used a sword to attack the dragon. The battle continued for many days. When Snow White gets tired, the dwarfs immediately support her. They use guns to attack and suppress the dragon. When both Snow White and the 7 dwarfs were very tired, she suddenly remembered that only water could kill the fire dragon. Then she used her remaining strength to cast water magic and attack the dragon. The dragon tried to fight back, struggling in the water. But the water quickly extinguished the fire on its body, and the dragon was finally destroyed. After the queen died, the castle and everything returned as beautiful as before. Snow White helps the 7 dwarfs build a new house. Every day she still cleaned the house for them. And sometimes Snow White becomes a warrior whenever people need her.